Welcome to another episode of Healing Through Love. Each week, we share ideas, experiences, and resources to increase the awareness of domestic and family violence and to empower survivors to grow and thrive. We talk with experts who share their advice, or with people who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. This is all about healing through love. And now, here are your hosts, Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
The Healing Through Love podcast with host Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson would love to acknowledge Global Glamping Charities Incorporated for generously supporting this podcast. Global Glamping Charities, solving homelessness in all of its forms. Reach out to them at globalglamping.org. The Healing Through Love podcast with Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. In episode 47, Suzanne Jabour shares with us how we can break down the stigma around grief.
For me, it's become really clear that the first step is about permission. And, in my life project, that permission would be external, right? People would show up to support you. We would be given permission to grieve out loud for as long as we need, which realistically is years, right? This whole you have a week to plan the service or the celebration of life, and then you're done and you're supposed to show up as your normal self again is a myth, and it's a harmful myth, right? Because what it tells to grievers is that there's something wrong with them if it takes them longer than a week, which of course it's going to. It's going to take you years, if not, I'll be grieving the loss of Ben forever. And I'm okay with that because I will love him forever. And grief is the other side of that coin, right? So I'm okay with that now. I've come to complete, that's my goal is integration. How do I move forward with this loss? So
the Healing Through Love podcast with Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
Hello and welcome to the Healing Through Love podcast. I'm your host, Charlene Lynch from charlenelynch.com. Healing Through Love is here to help victims and survivors of domestic and family violence find their way back to a more fulfilling and meaningful life. We interview experts and survivors who share their personal stories and offer advice to those who've experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their healing journey. As well as the Healing Through Love podcast, we hold annual Pamper Days here in Adelaide, and I'm proud to say that because we've expanded to a global concern, we are now having them in Dallas, Florida, Hong Kong, and also in a suburb here in Adelaide as well at a local retreat. We're very excited about the expansion of the Healing Through Love program and offering these Pamper Days to local survivors. Think day spa on steroids. We have local practitioners come along and provide their services for free for a much needed day of indulgence. Now, we're looking for other organisations who have similar values. Please get in touch with us. And we're also looking for additional guests. Now, on that subject, I have an amazing guest today, Suzanne Jabour. It's a French name. Who would know? I love it. And Suzanne is a grieving mum who found meaning in her loss through helping other grievers and helping the supporters that support the grievers as well. After the sudden death of her son in September 2020 at the age of 22, she knew she would only survive if she could stay conscious and curious about the grieving journey. She now helps other grievers do the same as they chart their unique grief path. She quickly learnt that most people had no idea how to support her, and she also works with people and other organisations and businesses build the skills and the protocols to build better support for those people going through grief. Hello and welcome, Suzanne.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be on with you today.
It's such a blessing to have you here. And this subject is so close to home for myself and many of our other listeners. It is a process. And if you're okay, I'd love you to unpack, your journey, how you got to becoming this grief counselor. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as you said, I come to this work as a grieving mom. I realized when my son died, I literally got that middle of the night phone call that is every parent's nightmare. And realized that even though I had lost other people really close to me, there was something about the death of a child, that out of order death, that really meant I was going to have grief at a level I hadn't experienced before. And the symptoms I had, the brain fog, your whole body is dysregulated and you're not sleeping or eating or really doing anything normal. I didn't understand that so much of that was normal, that that's exactly what should happen. And so I really had to make that decision, as you said, to be conscious, which meant that I was going to eyes wide open, face what was coming and just allow it to come. I knew if I went back to my sort of old ways of stuffing emotions and, trying to just soldier on and, being a good worker or a good anything wasn't going to work this time. I really just had to allow the emotions to be as overwhelming and horrifying and scary as they were, or I wouldn't survive. That was really a decision about survival. And the curiosity piece was about, I had done so much work, personal work to get to a place where I really lived my life with this kind of idea of a growth mindset. And I knew that was going to be really, really hard to hold in grief because it's so easy to get overwhelmed and feel kind of stuck and like you're just lost and there's something wrong with you. And I thought, no, I need to like, that has to be a decision that I stay curious. And really in the early days, and, maybe you can relate with this and other listeners too, in the early days when you've had a catastrophic loss like that, the curiosity really was about, how do I breathe? Like when I'm curled up in a ball on the couch sobbing that ugly cry, how do I get a breath? How do I release from that gasping, kind of situation and just get back into regulation? And so that's where the curiosity started, really was about how was I going to survive? How was I going to support my daughter? And I said to her very early on, I'm responsible for myself first, and then I'm here to help you because she's an adult. And everyone else is going to have to figure it out. There were no children involved. We didn't have a younger generation to worry about in our, immediate family. So it was really me and her and, the aunts and uncles and her dad were just going to have to figure it out. So really that sense of radical self-compassion, that sense of, I knew that many things other than the loss of a person need to be grieved. And this is something that your listeners are experiencing, right? There's so much about lost dreams and lost ideas about how our life is going to go and disappointments that all need to be grieved. And somehow we have this weird, hierarchy of grief, and we kind of try to dismiss the smaller ones, which I think is a huge mistake because we need to allow all of them. And there's something about having one of the ones that we kind of give credence to, and we kind of expect someone to grieve really big, that gave me permission that you don't always get to be able to grieve out loud. So I really knew I had to, while I had that grace from people, face it full on and let it come in that moment. Because if I stuffed it down and it waited for me, grief is so patient, it will just wait till you have time, and I let it explode 2 years from now or 5 years from then, that support network wasn't going to be the same. So it was a really conscious decision to just face it all, let it all be what it was going to be and not go into resistance, and really look at how grief actually works, because no one had told me all the things. And I'm sure, now that I have the experience and the education that I have, I'm sure when my dad died and my mom was left, I'm sure she had a very similar experience as to what I had with Ben. I think that's the closest parallel is, if you're in a really close relationship with your spouse or partner and they die, that would be a similar kind of grief. And I'm curious for your audience if that's, I think there's that level of magnitude of grief when you're looking at a situation where the relationship isn't what you hoped it would be or what you thought it was. And, I think we just all need to be talking about grief so much more because, especially right now, it's impacting all of us. And all of that unprocessed emotion and unprocessed grief comes out of us mostly as anger. And if we're seeing anything happening around the world right now, it's a whole lot of anger. And how do we together get at what's underneath and find that place? I love just your podcast title gives me so much hope because it's about healing through love. Like, how do we find that place where instead of the fear we feel about grief, we feel love? So that's become my mission is, how do we grieve with more love for ourselves when we're in the thick of it, more love for each other, more love for ourselves when we're trying to support someone and we're showing up and we feel awkward and vulnerable and like we don't know what to do and it all feels clunky. We just need to be showering all of that with love. So I'm just so grateful to have this space on your platform to share this message of really love and hope that, in those worst days when the only light you can see is a flickering candle at the end of the longest tunnel you've ever witnessed, that light is still there and there's still hope and there's still, there's a life to be lived and it's yours. And how do you take those baby steps and how do you find your way back to healing, which for me is an ongoing process, this process of healing that we're all going to do forever. That's our path here. That's what we're here for, is to heal and find love. So how do we do that? Through the lens of grief. How do we support each other better there?
There's so much in that that page to unpack.
Right.
So you're saying, like, let's look at grief without shame. Let's look at grief
Yes.
as a process to heal from where you are to where you need to be. So let's maybe stop with the labeling. Let's perhaps maybe lean into some self-care so that you can hold that space and heal from within. And let's give others grace as well, because other people are grieving at a different pace and for different reasons than ourselves. And it could be over the loss of a job. It could be over the loss of a relationship. Like, there's so many things that will bring us to this grief space. And I'm curious to find out, what would be the first step forward? Is it self-care, or what's the first step to move forward?
For me, it's become really clear that the first step is about permission. And, in my life project, that permission would be external, right? People would show up to support you. We would be given permission to grieve out loud for as long as we need, which realistically is years, right? This whole, you have a week to plan the service or the celebration of life, and then you're done and you're supposed to show up as your normal self again is a myth, and it's a harmful myth, right? Because what it tells to grievers is that there's something wrong with them if it takes them longer than a week, which of course it's going to. It's going to take you years, if not, I'll be grieving the loss of Ben forever. And I'm okay with that because I will love him forever. And grief is the other side of that coin, right? So I'm okay with that now. I've come to complete, that's my goal, is integration. How do I move forward with this loss? So that sense of giving ourselves permission to just own it and to stand up for what we need and to allow ourselves to slow down. There's so much pressure culturally to be fast about it because the people around us are so uncomfortable, right? And we let their discomfort impact how we behave. And I really had to get to a place of sort of radical permission to myself to grieve and to them to be uncomfortable. I'm sure I made people uncomfortable. There's no question, a grieving mom who's choosing to grieve out loud. Absolutely, I must have been terrifying to people there. And that's okay, because we live in a society that's grief illiterate and where we don't want to talk about it. So we're not learning. Because if we are illiterate, we need to learn, but we're not doing that together. So I think it's so brilliant for you to point to that shame piece, because we all end up feeling shame, right? I feel shame as a griever because no one's told me that everything I'm experiencing is perfectly normal and should be happening the way it is and should take as long as I want. So I feel shame about how I'm doing it. The people who are wanting to support me feel shame because they don't know how, and they feel uncomfortable, and they feel shame that they don't know how to do it, and they're going to say the wrong thing, or they try something and it doesn't work. And so then they feel shame about having tried. There's so much shame. And when we're in shame, if we're making shame-based meaning, we can't learn. And what we need to do in this area is learn together. We all need to learn together. I have a wealth of experience and training. You have experience and training. People have experience but no training. People have training but less experience. But we all have something. We have all grieved something. And if we talked openly about it with each other, then we wouldn't feel so isolated, because there's also a beautiful opportunity in grief for connection. And that's the other thing I think right now that we need more than in my lifetime anyway. I'm 55. I've never seen a time where we felt so isolated, so separated, so alone. And we crave that connection. We're, as humans, we're wired for connection. If you look anthropologically, we're supposed to live in community. We're supposed to support each other. We're not supposed to do anything on our own. But we've all bought this myth of individuality. And, then you counter that, add on top of that social media and everyone presenting these curated lives. And, we're in a mess and we need to disrupt it.
I love it. Okay, so have open conversations about it. And if you're the person who's going through grieving, do it your way. And don't be connected to what everyone else is bringing to the party. They've got their own stuff, their own stories, their own backstory that they're bringing to your grief. And know that you need to do it in your own time, in your own space, and just love yourself through the process. I do. I love that. I have to say, though, thanks for the C word, but I actually feel more connected since then, because now we can have conversations like you're in another country, you're in Canada, yes? Yeah. And I'm in Australia. Well, although this did happen before, it's happening more so. So I'm feeling more connected, not less connected. But I think it's just your viewpoint as well. But I agree. It's like one of the taboos. So like suicide, it's a taboo. We don't talk about it. Grief, like we don't talk about it. And everyone's expected to know what to do in a space of grief.
Right.
But do we know? We're looking at examples of our parents who grieved completely differently. Now, I know in some countries you pay people to come and grieve at the funerals because you need to have the loudest wailers to make the most noise, to show the most respect for the person who passed away. Now, look, so that different cultures do it very, very differently. Yes, and maybe there's something in that. Maybe there's something in about making the noise, letting the energy out, letting everybody know, and grieving out loud. I don't know. Maybe we could look at that.
100%. And if you had people who were being paid to be out loud, this is so fascinating to me. I hadn't really thought about it till this second. If you have people there who are being paid to be out loud, then as a mourner or the person who's grieving, you're not going to stand out in the crowd. So what kind of radical permission is that for everyone to come together and be out loud? So it's almost like you have, when you watch the Olympics and they have like the rabbit runner who's like the pacemaker, right? Who's going to help set you up. It's almost like your grieving pacemaker, right? That's going to say, oh, this is how loud you should be. And now we're trying to keep up with the loudest ones. That to me feels so much more healthy than those of us who are just, we're going to do that. That's not moving enough energy, right? Emotions are energy. We need to move that stuff around. And so if you're giving permission to be like out loud wailing and, moaning, whatever it is, to find one of those funerals. I bet there's got to be one on YouTube somewhere. But I'm fascinated, right, by what permission that would give everybody else to then be as loud as you wanted, because you're not going to disturb anybody. You're not going to stand out in the crowd, right? It's a whole paradigm shift, which is so brilliant and feels so healthy. Like just like my gut is like, ooh, I want to do it that way.
So from my understanding, that's the Jewish religion. So that
and there's a number of faith traditions where you come together to be loud, to be proud about it, to be, and in some ways to be jubilant, right? Which we also deny ourselves. We deny ourselves both ends of the spectrum. Well, I mean, in Western culture, for me anyway, we're denying ourselves most of the spectrum of emotions, if we're being honest. And that's really where we need to start, because grief is, my daughter so succinctly described it as all the emotions all the time. Because she was like, what on earth is going on here? I'm like, oh, it's emotions. Isn't this fun, right? Terrible. Those early days, especially that acute phase where you're in shock and you're under the water of emotions. But it is that sense of, if we deny ourselves the despair, we're also denying ourselves the jubilance, right? And what if we got together and danced it out and made music and moved, right? Moved our bodies, our whole sense that we should be still and quiet and tamped down, right? Is so harmful, really. It's harmful. That's not the way people are supposed to live, right? We're supposed to be much more honest than that about what's really going on for us, I think.
Very, Susan. I look at some cultures, they dance at funerals, and
Yeah.
and I'm Irish, so we funerals and tell jokes. So we have a wake, which is like we're trying to wake the dead, and it's all about skull and drinks and telling a joke, and it's turned into many an Irish funeral I've been to has turned into a party. So
yeah.
no, so I think every culture does it a little bit differently, and what could we learn from that? And we could learn a lot about the process. I love it. So you bring so much to the table in a space where we're all grieving about something. And
100% we are.
I love what it is that you bring in and around the subject of self-care and grieving and permission. So once we've got that permission, what is the next thing of the progression? I mean, I know there's no set time for how long everything should take, but after permission, so that you can let it all out, and what's the next thing that we need to be looking at?
I think really it's about that emotional acceptance, our emotional intelligence, and, looking at, what is it, to me, emotions are messengers. They all have something to teach us. So it's about, and I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about those acute earliest days when you're just still in shock and survival mode, and you don't know what time it is or what day it is. And you just, like, if you're in survival mode, I'm not talking to you. If you're in survival mode, you need to give yourself permission to just be in survival mode and do what you need to get through each day until that tsunami lessens a little bit. And then it becomes about, what are these emotions? What does this mean? Like, how do I make sense of it? And really looking at, for me, a big difference this time around with this loss was that I lost myself too. Like, my identity fell apart. And I was really aware of this sense that, all of the pieces of myself and my life were like around me, like big jigsaw puzzle pieces on the floor. And my arms were already full. I didn't have any more capacity to hold anything. And there was pieces of me still on the ground. So how did I just take a baby step forward towards whatever my life was going to be now, only able to hold what I had, and acknowledging that there was parts of me I had to leave behind, and parts of my way of being and my way of, my relationship with emotions, my relationship with other people. There's something about, grief when it's that big that just shines a big spotlight on your life. And stories you were telling yourself, there's a bright light on them. And for me, it was a real reality wake up check, right? About, okay, what that I thought about my life is actually true. And what of it had I made up? And what of it was story? And how do I then, with that seeing, figure out the parts of me I want to bring with me, and the parts of me that I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with leaving that behind. Like, one of the things for me that happened almost immediately is I completely lost the capacity to perform. We all have this kind of performative aspect to our life sometimes, where we're doing what's expected of us. We're performing good employee or good mother, good worker, good sister, whatever it is. I had no capacity for that. I was like raw, honest. I literally couldn't. It wasn't even a conscious decision. And then I got to make a conscious decision about whether I wanted to put any of that back on. And I thought, I really don't. Like, my life is so much richer when I'm being honest with people and I'm being honest with myself. And is that a hard transition for people to make? And do you lose people that aren't ready for that? Absolutely. But you get to start making those choices. And then I think, it's the choices about, what do you want your life to be now? Because, our loved one is gone, or the dream we had is gone. And that can be devastating at the same time as we're looking at, what do we do now? How do I rebuild a life? What do I want that life to look like? So for me, that curiosity piece, that sense of, well, what next? And that changes over time. Each day, the what next question changes. The scope of it changes. The area I'm looking at changes. And I just really had to stick with, okay, like, what next? What baby step can I take today that will build a life? What baby step do I take? What baby step do I take? And it's baby steps to success. When you're in grief, there's no leaps and bounds. It's all baby steps. And I think we're so unculturated to think we should take these great, we all want to be Superman, right? Leap to the rescue. No, we're going to baby step our way to rescuing ourselves. And it's just little choices after little choices. For me, I knew I wanted my life to be as big and rich and abundant and beautiful as it would have been if Ben was still here. And I also was really clear that, this terrible thing happened in my life, happened to Ben, happened in my life, and I wasn't going to let it be for nothing. So those two ideas kind of became my drive and kind of became my North Star. Like, if it's not going to be for nothing, then what? Then what next? How do I share what I'm learning, what I know, what I've experienced to help other people, to open up this conversation, to shift the paradigm? Like, what little steps can I do every day to kind of, push this conversation, push people's comfort zone in a gentle way that is full of love and, eradicates shame and blame and judgment, because that's where we're all entangled in grief, right? We know nothing about it, but we want to judge how you're doing it. This is silly, right? So how do we disrupt all of that in a way that's only a little bit scary?
Wow, there's so much in that as well to unpack. I love it. So the giving permission seems very expansive. It's like letting it all go and being free and giving yourself permission and giving others permission to do it their way. Because as you say, they like to micromanage your own grief.
Mm-hmm.
Still don't know what that's about. That's okay. But giving everybody permission to do it their way is very expansive. And now the acceptance feels like it's coming inside and doing the inside work to decide what life looks like now to move forward. So it's a beautiful process. And I know that there's so much more to the process. And I know that our listeners are wondering, how do they work with you to move forward? So can you tell us a little bit about your programs and what you do?
Yes. So if I'm working with someone who's experiencing grief themselves, I do that one-on-one. For me, especially in the early days, a group didn't appeal to me at all. If a group appeals to you, there are brilliant groups out there, many amazing, wonderful groups online, in person. If a group appeals to you, find one, please. We need to be witnessed in our grief. It's really critical. It's a critical piece of that journey. So I do that work one-on-one just as a coach, and I do it all on Zoom. So, global access is great. As you say, we're so connected now globally. And sometimes I forget that, like, there's a whole city right around me because I'm on podcast with someone from Australia or India or the Philippines or, all over the place, the UK, all over, which is so beautiful because this really is a global conversation. So one-on-one, I work with grievers as a coach, one-on-one. And then I offer workshops to groups. So I'll come in, I have a series of workshops that all kind of fit together or can be pulled apart and done separately, which I'm happy to come in and do with a community group or an organization, a service organization, anybody. happy to come and work with you to just start that conversation. And I talk about, what can you say to someone who's grieving? What can you do for them? What if you're like in the workplace? How could you support someone? Because those are all different relationships that we need to navigate when we want to show up and support someone. And then I have a 6-step program for businesses. So if you're a business owner who's thinking, oh, there's got to be something besides like your 3 days off and a referral to the employee assistance program, right? We know that's not enough, but that's what we have in our toolbox, so we offer it. But there's so much more robust support we could be offering, which really then creates the ripple effect of supporting everyone in the workplace and encouraging everyone to come as their whole selves to work, right? It's okay to come to work when you're grieving, and we want to support you to be successful there. And how do we do that? Because a lot of the time, we don't do a very brilliant job of it. We try. Some places don't try at all. Some places try really hard, and some are more successful than others because it's such a taboo topic and we're not talking about it. So we don't have the skills and mindsets we need. So that's really become my mission. How do I help individual grievers one-on-one just find their way, have a space where they can come and speak what's true and not be shamed or blamed or judged, because the good, the bad, and the ugly are all welcome here. And then how do we help people who want to support someone, whether it's in an organization, in your own individual life, or in your business, really build those skills and mindsets that we need to be able to show up fully ourselves, fully to lean into love, right? To step aside from the fear and lean into love and build those deep connections that we all want. So that's what I do.
I love it. My tea went down the wrong way.
Oh no. You're doing great. I couldn't tell.
Can you tell us a little bit about the resources? Because we'll put that link there as well.
Yeah, so there's 2 pages of free resources on my website. I've given you the link for the ones that are sort of for everyday folks. One of the resources that's there talks about the symptoms of grief, because that's one of the things we don't talk about. So I break down 8 of the really common symptoms. So brain fog, eating issues, sleeping issues, muscular issues, those kinds of things. So that's one resource. And the other is a resource that gives you sort of a snapshot of those workshops I was talking about. So they're in one resource together is what can I say, what can I do, and what about at work? And they're just really simple tips and, tips and tricks sounds kind of frivolous. So I've decided to call them ideas and suggestions because that sounds so much more lofty. But tips and tricks works fine to just get you started, to say, okay, like all of a sudden I have someone who's really grieving and shoot, I know I'm supposed to have like talked about it with a friend or done a workshop or something, but I'm in the thick of it. What do I do? So that's a place you can go to just really grab a quick resource that will at least give you a few tools to get started.
I love it. This has been another amazing episode. Yeah, my voice has disappeared.
And there's your tea right there.
It was my green tea. It went down the wrong way. This is a subject very close to my heart, and love what you bring to the subject. And I'm looking forward to referring my clients that are in that space to come and have a conversation with you. All of the links are in the show notes and also the description. Thank you so much for listening to another podcast from Healing Through Love. That's a bye from me and a bye from Suzanne.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Healing Through Love. You can get further resources, see the show notes, or simply reach out to us via our website at htlaustralia.org. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on the Healing Through Love podcast.